Cool. Right, so I sort of asked this question, right? What is this 1? What does this number mean, right? If we're changing our position, I'll just delete this stuff. If we're changing our position every frame by this amount, what's another name for this amount? Right, the rate of change of your position. Like if something is moving around and it's moving around at a certain rate, not even in a code, right? If I like throw a ball and I throw it, Speed. Yeah, right? It's like how fast you're moving. It's the speed of the object, right? And so in coding, it can be really helpful to take these concepts and turn them into concepts that we can use and change, right? So instead of a variable called x, well, I'll just leave it, but I'll create a new variable at the top of my function, and I'll call it speed, right? And I'll set it equal to 1. And what's cool about that is down here, instead of saying 1, I can just say speed, right? And it's going to go look up that value. And I'll say speed, oops. And it's going to look up that value. And so now when I run the game, it moves at an equal rate of 1. Right? But if I wanted to change this, instead of having to go to every single place I write down the number 1, I could just right here at the top change this number. And when the code runs, it's going to look up that number and it's going to change it in real time for us. Right? So now it moves at a rate of 4. What's also kind of fun too is you can even change it while we're running it. So, and you don't have to use just whole numbers. You can use floating point numbers. So it's moving this slow, right? But then let's do it like this. I'm going to need to shrink this a little bit, move it over here, right? If I were to change, I'll hide this because that's a little ugly. Oh, well, I didn't mean to. Okay, fine. All right, here we go, right? So we have this nice slow little guy. And if I change the speed, you'll see that suddenly, and I save it, it speeds up. It's supposed to speed up. Speed. Speed. Well, now it goes faster, yeah? And what's even handier, right? It's, you know, it's one thing to be able to change our values from the top of our code, but Godot also offers us a really nice feature called the export annotation, where if you just do this, if you write the word, if you do an @ sign followed by export, and then hit space, you'll see that over here, bang, we have speed suddenly here in the inspector. Okay, and we can change this value, and it will update it right there. So we don't even have to open our code editor to change some of our values sometimes. Okay, so this is a really handy trick to do things like if you want to create a character that has a certain speed, right, or a certain amount of health, you can create all these variables for these values. You could say @export health for our health, set it equal to 10. I'll say typically you actually want to have like a maximum health, and then you can have like another variable called current health, and I'll set this equal to 10, right? Actually, what I'll do is I'll set this equal to, can I set it equal to the maximum health? No, you can't set it right there, but I'll just set it equal to 10 for now. Oh, sorry, I'm having this error, so maybe I can do this. Let's see. Maximum, okay, sorry. I'll set it equal to 10, right? And then you can do stuff like change the values just here from the inspector when you're editing your game, okay? And I'll like change the speed to 2, right? Run it again. We'll see it goes faster. Any questions about exporting a variable? It's just a helpful way to be able to edit it from over here without having to edit it here.
And it translates, right? Like if you change on the right, it'll change the code.
So it doesn't change the code. It changes, what happens is this is the default initial value for when you create the object. but it's sort of like you change it during the runtime. It's not going to change it forever. It just changes the instance of it. So the reason why this is helpful, right? Let's actually do this. Let's sort of, I'll make a new example, right? So I'm going to go and make a new scene. I'm going to call this scene level, right? And then I'm going to make, I'll make another node. Yeah, okay, sorry, brain. We'll make a level. I'm just gonna add like the icon here for our player. Okay, I'll call this like player, but then maybe I wanna have some enemies, right? So in order to make an enemy, what I'll do is I'll make a new scene. And I'm actually gonna change this type to the sprite 2D. So I did that kind of quick. If you ever want to change the type of node you have in your scene, you can right click on it and then do change type. So I'm just going to make this a sprite. I'm going to call this like enemy. Right? I'll give it a texture of the icon, but I'll make it red. So I'm going to go to visibility modulate. I'll just kind of make it red. And, oh, it is red, great. Right, so now we have like a little red enemy. That's kind of cool. And I'll attach a script to it. And I'll just hit create. Okay, right? So I'm going to save this scene as enemy. I'm going to save this scene as level. Okay, so now we have a level scene that has a player in it, right? We also have this enemy scene. And what we can do is we can go to our level and we can bring in our enemy, right? So we can bring in an enemy scene here, and I can bring in another enemy scene here. All right, so this is all stuff that we've been doing so far. But what's really nice about being able to give them these exported variables is we can do stuff like this. So like I'm going to say at export var speed equals 1, okay? And then I'll say like in the process function, I'll make the position dot x plus equal to the speed. Oops. Right, and so this is just, for starters, this is just gonna, if we run the enemy scene, right, this is our enemy script attached to our enemy. So if we just run this enemy scene, we'll see that we have this enemy that moves from left to right, right? And if we go back to our level scene, where we have both of them, we'll see that when we run this scene, now they both move from right to left, right? But maybe you want to have one enemy that moves a little faster than the other one. So because we exported the variable, without even having to go inside the scene, we can change it right here for each of the enemies, right? So maybe we'll call this one like slow enemy. And we'll call this one like fast enemy. And I'll make this speed for the fast enemy like 3. And I'll keep the slow enemy 1. And you'll see that this speed will change the speed of this one. And the speed property here will change the speed of this one, right? So now if I run this, you'll see that they sort of move in different ways, right? So that's a reason why exporting your variables is helpful, because then when you sort of have instances of it, you can change those different instances, but they're separate, right? It's not like we've changed the speed of all of our enemies. We've just changed the speed of this one particular instance of that. Does that make sense? That was a lot. That got quite much. Are we all good on that? Yeah, question.
Now help me check. I read on the at export, but there's nothing here in the step.
Yeah, let's see. So you need to say at export var speed equals 4.
Right, there's nothing.
Did you save the scene?
Yeah.
This script is not actually attached to this node, you know? So in order to do that, you can also just drag the script onto the node, I believe. Try that. Yeah. So now it's attached to the node, and now you can speed. Yeah. So that's another thing. Sometimes if you just create a script and it's not actually attached to your node, right? So like right here, Here, if I hit detach, you'll see I still have this enemy script, this enemy.gd, right? I still have the text, but the node itself doesn't have the script attached to it. So even though I have the speed exported over here, when I click on the node, we don't see the speed over here. That's because, again, the script is not attached to the node. So you just want to make sure that you can see that it's attached with that little icon. And if you need to attach a script to the node, you can always drag the script onto the node. Or you can right-click on it, click Attach Script, and then you can either create a new script or you can find an existing script and hit Load. And both of those attach it. And so therefore, when you click on it, you get the variable. Any other questions? Any other things people are struggling with right now?
Can you show again how to to drag the icon to the file?
Yeah, like for your for the sprite. So when you have any node, right? Lots of nodes have these things called properties, right? And they sometimes take resources. So right over here, the sprite 2D. If you just create a sprite 2D node, it doesn't actually have a texture property set to it yet. So you can either drag a file from your file browser onto it by going like this. Whoa, this is kind of a pain in the neck though. So you could drag and drop it, or what you can do is click on it, and then you can go down to either load or quick load. If you do quick load, it'll look for any compatible file types, and you can just click on it and hit open, right? And this will work with any type of image that you have, right? So I know I'm always getting dogs in this class. So I'll do something different. I'll get a cat this time. Wow, I'm really branching out. Cat PNG. That's pretty good, actually. Yeah, I don't have any notes. That's the cat for me. Open image in a new tab. Actually, is that really a PNG? That should be fine. Right, I'll drag this cat into my project folder. I'll drag and drop it. Can I do this? Should be able to. Maybe I need to save it to the desktop or copy the image. I'm going to open the file manager and then paste the image. I'm going to paste the image. This cat really doesn't want to be got. You guys get the idea. But I'll save this cat. I'm determined now. Cat to the modules folder, coding fundamentals. Save it right there. Right, I've saved this image into my file now, so now we'll see we have this cat PNG. It's got an adorable little icon. And so if I go back to the texture and try and load a new texture and go to quick load, we'll see we have two options, right? Because it recognizes PNG as a valid option. And so you can just load it in that way. Cool? Anybody else got questions? Anybody struggling with anything? Any problems so far? So we're pretty close to being able to complete the requirements for Lab 2, right? Lab 2 is really just, again, having a script, right? We just want to have a Gato project with a script, a node that has a script with an exported variable. Now we want to talk about conditional logic and all this other stuff. Okay, so we're pretty close. We just need to cover a couple other points, yeah? So I'm going to move on and explain some other stuff. Before I do that, does anybody have any questions?
I got questions.
Yeah, hit me.
How to rename the files?
How do you rename files?
Like these tags on the top, like.
Yeah, let's take a look.
Yeah. I was trying to rename these two things.
Yeah, so these are the names of your scene, right? That's the name of that scene there. So you can rename it there. And then this hasn't been saved yet, right? So just save this scene.
Okay.
Yeah, and then you can hit save. There you go.
Okay.
Cool? And then, yeah, on that one, just rename that file. Yeah. Any other questions? Any other questions, guys? Yeah, what's up?
Okay, for the first part, create a which is my I didn't have any groups. Not in this group, I didn't have the one to like the enemy here to like
Yeah, so is this your, this says camera 2D, right?
Yeah,
So this is attached to a camera up here. Seems like you don't have an enemy script yet. Is this your enemy script, or?
no, I don't have it.
Okay, so which node do you want to have be your enemy?
This one.
Okay, so then again, just click on it and then click this new script button. Oh, yeah. So click the script button. Yeah, then hit OK. And then now you have an enemy script that's attached to your node, right? And you'll see that it's down here. That's the file. Cool? Good? Any other questions on any of this stuff so far? Yeah, no, it's good. This is good.
So when I went to access script, it just it's like no longer putting
Yeah, it's a little weird, right? So, for starters, you can tell you're in this player.gd script, right? This is the name of this, so this text is this file, right? Player.gd is currently, it looks like it's not attached to anything, right? I think if we go, you tell us it was attached to a node when there's that little icon attached to it, so let's go back to the enemy scene maybe. Yeah, it's not on the enemy scene, let's see, not even on the level, so let's pick, so do you want this to be your player script? Yeah, and you can either drag this script onto the player node. So now it's attached, right, it's associated. And an easy way to tell that you're, if you're like, what script is attached to my node, you can just always push this icon and it'll open up the corresponding script. So like for instance, if you go back to your enemy scene, right on the enemy, right, create a new script. Enemy, so now with this script, right, if you go back to your player scene, and then click on the player, it switches to the player scene. So that's one way to help. Do you have any questions? Yeah, so we really have like a nice pretty good. So now just just save it in the file. You can call it enemy here, whatever you want. And now your main scene, Sweet. So any questions about any of this stuff? Yeah. Yeah. What's that? What's going on? Right, well, so for starters, right, we have the variable speed, but we're not actually changing the position. So the first thing you want to do is like try and change the position. Yeah, right, so say position dot x or position dot y equals plus equals speed. Well, you want to say plus equals speed. Yeah, cool. And then you're just going to need to get rid of that word pass. So if you've got an error here, right, that's just a spelling error, right? And I think you need an S. Yeah. So guys, if you have errors, right, if your code isn't working, Gado's going to start giving you hints as to why it might not be working. So, for instance, right, if you're like, what's happening? Why isn't my code working? It's going to say, hey, there's something weird with this line, okay? And it'll often even give you a hint, right? This identifier positazidon is not a real word, right? So that gives you a hint to say, look at this word, and you can tell that there's a spelling error, right? So the errors are a little bit weird at first, but at the very least, they always tell you where the problem is, okay? So just if you're having a problem running your code, anything that's red, the computer's saying, hey, there's something wrong right around here. So it's good to look there. Okay, I'm going to show you this last sort of final concept, right? Because we have started making things move around, right? we've been able to change these properties. I guess I'll also point out that any of these properties can be changed, right? Not just the position, but you can also change the scale. So for instance, if I were to change the scale of the enemy, right? If I did scale dot x plus equals speed, we'll see that it's going to start getting big in this weird way, right? It's going to start stretching out, right? Why do we think it's just stretching out this way instead of like scaling uniformly?
Because you only change the x.
Only change the x. That's exactly right, right? If I were to change y, well, you know, there's a really handy, sort of awesome, incredible superpower you have when you're coding. It's just called copying and pasting. You do it all the time, but you just change a little bit, right? So I'm going to copy and paste and hit Y instead, and now we'll see that we, what am I doing here? What's wrong? Oh yeah, sorry, I ran the wrong scene. It's very easy in Godot to run the wrong scene sometimes. So I'm in this enemy scene, I'm going to run the current scene, and we'll see there it goes. It gets nice and big, right? We zoom in on the nose. Very scary stuff, yeah. You can also, again, you don't just have to do plus equals, you can do minus equals. So now we'll shrink, right? And actually, it's kind of interesting, right? It shrunk, so I'll slow down the speed a little bit so we can see what happened. So it shrinks, make it even smaller. Once it gets below a scale of 0 and goes into the negative, it starts scaling out, but in the other direction, kind of inverted. So that's kind of a weird thing. See, we start shrinking, and then once we hit 0, we we turn inside out, basically. You don't need to worry about the inside out stuff, but it's kind of an accident.
It's quite weird.
You can also change the rotation, right? So you can say rotation. And if you just say rotation, it's going to be in something called radians, which if you took trigonometry, you can do. But most people are more familiar with degrees, so you can just say rotation degrees plus equals 1 or whatever. Now we'll start spinning. Whee! So you can change any of these properties, right? And if you specifically want to learn how to change a node's properties, a good thing to do is to click the documentation. And you'll see, right, these are all the methods that the node has access to. How do we get here? Enemy, documentation. No, somehow we're, oops. You can right-click on the node and you can go to Open Documentation. And then you'll see here are all the properties you can access in code. Here are all the methods you can access in code. And these are all the different things you can do with the object, okay? Right? Any node 2D has access to these properties and these methods. And you can learn a lot more about it just by digging into the documentation that's built in. Yeah, question?
Where can I get the script of the property?
Where can you get the script of the property?
Yeah, where is the screen that you just pull out?
That documentation screen?
Yeah.
Yeah. If you click, there's a couple different ways to get to it. You can do, firstly, you can always click search help. And then these are all the different things in Godot. And so if you want to say like, oh, how does a sprite work? You can say sprite. And then it'll sort of pull up this search thing and you can hit open. And then it'll open the documentation for sprites. And what's cool about this is, right, remember we sort of talked about how all these nodes inherit from other nodes. So Sprite 2D has a parent called Node 2D, right? And you can see that over here. Right here are the Sprite 2D properties, and it has these parent Node 2D properties. So if you want to see what Node 2D does, you can just click on this. And it'll show you all of the different properties that Node 2D has and all the different methods. And if you click on these, it'll take you down, and this sort of shows you kind of how to use them, right? It has, for some of the more complicated things like the methods, it'll sort of explain a little bit what it does and how to use it. And if you want even more in-depth stuff, I recommend clicking the Open in Online Documents. and then it'll take you right to that page on the internet, right? And also, it's worth it to, asking ChatGPT or other AIs can be pretty good with this stuff, but also, this API, the code is constantly changing for these game engines, and so it's not always going to get it right. So if you ask AI, it's worth it to also just do some research, either in the documentation or YouTube videos are great. They're really good ways for learning these things. Specifically here on the documentation, if you go down to, here, I'll zoom out. We'll go up to the top. If you go to community and then tutorials and resources, here's some written tutorials, and here are the video tutorial. Oh, wow, they just changed that. That's weird. There were a bunch of good video tutorials. They're on the, I have a page on the, okay, wow. They unlisted a bunch of them. It is true that if you just search YouTube for like Godot 4 tutorial, there are a bunch of really great things that come up. Okay, so back at the lab too, right, we have this exported variable. We need to talk about conditional logic and user input, because currently our nodes are just kind of flying around and doing things on their own. But again, a game is interactive, right? And in order to interact, we have to be able to interact with it. We have to be able to do things to the computer and have it respond to our inputs. So in order to do that, I'm going to talk about something known as conditional logic, which I have a helpful little picture for. Okay. So we've already talked about these things called data types, right? We've talked about integers. You've seen that things can be a number, right? Things can be a floating point number, like with a decimal point. We've already talked about strings, which are just sort of letters. There's also another really important type of a data type called a Boolean. And a Boolean is a lot simpler than all the other data types. A Boolean, where numbers can be any numbers and strings can be whatever, a Boolean can only be one of two things. A Boolean can either be true or false, okay? So when you have a Boolean, it's either true or false. You can also say 1 or 0, and 1 equals true and 0 equals false. You with me so far? Yeah? You have things that are either true or false. And in the real world, we use these things called like conditions, right? We have these ideas of if something is true, you do a thing, otherwise you do something else, right? And in the real world, we have this stuff all the time, right? If condition A is true, then I do thing A, otherwise I'll do thing B. So like an example of a conditional statement in the real world is like, if I am hungry, then if that's true, I should eat. Otherwise, I should not eat, right? What's another conditional statement we might have? Like if something is true, then something else.
If I'm tired, true, I just go to bed, false, I go to school.
Well, I mean, I think that's great that you only go to school when you're not tired. I'm sure there's a lot of people who would disagree with that. There's plenty of people who go to school regardless of if it's true or false. But that's a great example, right? If I am tired, I should go to bed. If not, I can do other stuff, right? Or maybe like, if I have money, if I have $100, then I'll buy myself something nice. Otherwise, I won't, right? Otherwise, I should get a job, right? We can think about all these sorts of things in the world as either like these true-false statements, right? And obviously in the real world, there's lots of stuff in between, right? Like for instance, you might go to school even though you are tired, right? Or like you might eat even if you're not hungry or whatever. But computers, it's really helpful to break things down into these binary choices, right? And you can think about it with games too, right? So like if your score is 10 points in the game, if that's true, then you win the game and the game is over, right? If it's not true, then you don't win the game and the game keeps going, yeah? Another example is like Mario, right? If you're pressing the jump button, if that's true, then your character jumps. If you're not pressing the jump button, your character's not going to jump, right? And that's really important that that works, right? Because if your character just starts jumping and you're not pressing the jump button, you're like, whoa, the game is broken, right? Or if you press the jump button and nothing happens, you're like, whoa, this is a bad game. The game is broken, right? So in computers, we want these conditional statements to be true. We want them to work. And yeah, the way that we sort of structure this in code is with a thing that's called a conditional statement. We have a variable, which is our condition to test. That's a Boolean, and you can say it's either true or false. And then we write if the condition to test, right? If it's true, then we're going to do the first thing. Else, or otherwise, we're going to do the second thing. Yeah? So like, for instance, in this case right here, this conditional statement is true, right? We just say this variable equals true, the Boolean true. So then when the computer checks this, when it runs this code, it says if the condition to test, what was the value of that? Oh, it's true? Great, then I will do this thing, okay? But if I had said this is false up here, when I go to check this, it would say, what, is this true or false? And if this said false, then we would skip this part, and we would go down and do this part instead, okay? So it's kind of like a fork in the road, right? It's like a choice that the computer gets to make. And it's really helpful for creating these types of interactive behaviors. Also, you don't need to have the bottom, yeah, we'll skip that part. You don't need to have the else statement. You can also just have an if statement, right? So you can just say, if this is true, then we'll do this thing. And if it's not true, then you just skip it, okay? So you can also just have if statements without an else statement. So, for example, right, I'll go back to Gato. I'm going to make a new scene. I'm going to call this like if example. I'm going to create a new script, right? And this is just a node 2D. You can't see anything. It's just a blank 2D point in space with a script attached to it. But I'm going to do a couple things. I'm going to create a variable, export var score, right? And inside and I'm going to give this score a value of 0. And inside the process function, I'll say if score equals 0, or sorry, equals 10, then I'll print out you win. Now, we do this equals thing because, right, as we saw earlier, when we just say equals, if we just say score equals 0, the computer's going to think you're trying to set the value of score equal to this new number, equal to 10. Instead, when you do equals, that's saying, hey, check and let me know if these two things are the same. So check and let me know if this equals this, and return either true or false. So when you do score equals 10, if 10 is 0, it'll turn into true. Or if score is 10, then it'll turn into true. But if score is not 10, this will turn into false. So the way this works, right, if I were to run this code right now, we'll see currently nothing is happening, right, because our score is 0. So every time we go through this frame, we're not triggering this if statement. But if I increase my score, right, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, we win, right? We triggered the win condition, yeah? So this is a really example of how a variable and an if statement can create some logic, right? I can also add a line that says, right, if it's not 10, print out, keep playing. Okay. So now, when I go back down, I should save this because, there you go. So now, right, whenever it's below 10, it says keep playing, but every time we hit 10, we win. Here's something interesting, right? When I go above 10, it says keep playing, right? That's not really the behavior you want, right? Oftentimes you win a game once you hit the score that you need. Does anybody know how we might implement that? This sort of like like a greater or less than thing. Right, if we say if the score is greater than or equal to 10, so this greater than sign means, right, if this number is greater than or equal to this number, then we're going to do this part. So now we'll see that we'll output the condition that we want as long as we're at or above the number, right? But when we go, oh, what's happening? Do I need to save? I need to probably save. Whoop. Oh, something is wrong. What's happening? Try it one more time. Okay, so it's at 6, right? 7, 8, 9, 10, we win. 11, we win. 12, we win. 13, we win. 14, we win. Right? Make sense? So you can do these sort of greater, if it is greater or equal than. You can also do if it's less than or equal to, or you can just check to see if it's equal to it. I know this is a lot. There's just one, I keep saying there's just one more thing. There is one more part, because what we want to do is we now want to combine this idea of checking to see if something is true and doing something with listening for user input, right? Listening for button presses and stuff, okay? So in Godot, I'm going to make another scene. I'm going to call this one, I'm going to use the sprite 2D as the root node. I'm going to call this moving player. I'll call this actually controllable player. I'm going to create a new script and attach it to it. I'm going to stop running this program because it keeps outputting this stuff. In this scene, right, again, we don't have any visuals, so I'm going to give an icon to it real quick. Okay. Now, here inside this process function, right, for this new controllable player script, what we want to do is we want to check and see if we're interacting with the computer, and then we can do something. And in order to do that, all you need to do is use what's known as the input class. So you just have to do this. You write the word input with a capital I. So you say input dot is action just pressed. We see it pops up right here. Is action just pressed? And then we already see we have a bunch of actions that are built in that we can select from. I'll just do UI accept. Or yeah, I'll do UI accept. So if action just pressed is UI accept, then we're going to do this thing. So I'll print out I pressed a button. Okay. When I run this, there's something wrong. What's wrong? Oh, this is maybe too indented? No, it should be that. If input is action just pressed UI accept. Hello. Oh, I didn't write the word if. I just wrote input. So sorry, you need to say if. Right? Because what this does is this returns true or false when we press the UI accept button. And so we say if we're pressing this button is true, then we do this thing. Okay, so now when I run this code, every time I press other buttons, nothing happens, right? But if I press specifically the UI accept button, which is the space bar, you'll see we have stuff happening. Okay? So if I want to turn this into movement, how do we think we would do that? I'll show you. Because it's a little tricky, right? I'm going to do the magic trick, copy and pasting. But instead of UI accept, I'm going to say, I'm going to search for an action called left. Okay, this is the arrow key by default. The UI left is the arrow key. And so then every time I press left, maybe I want to change the X position, right? So I'll say position dot X plus equals 1. Okay. When I save that, what am I doing wrong here? Oh, this should be out a little bit, right? Okay, so now when I run this, every time I press the left button, you'll see it moves slightly, but it's moving in the wrong direction, right? If I'm pressing left and it's moving slightly to the right, it's not really what we want. Do we have any sense why it's moving to the right? Remember, this is 0, 0, right? And so increasing on the y goes down, and increasing on the x goes to the right. So if we want to move to the left, we don't need to plus increase. Right, we want to do minus. Yeah, so I'm going to do -1. And I will refresh and try it again. Right, and so now when I press it, it moves to the left. That's nice, but I don't want to have to keep tapping this every single time to just do one step, right? It's kind of it's not a very fun game. I mean, maybe if you're making like Flappy Bird or something. Why do we think it only happens one time? You can kind of see it. Oops. Did you say something? Somebody say something? It just pressed, right? This is going to return true just when you press it, for the one time you press the button, which is really helpful for maybe like jumping or shooting, right? Something that you do only one time. But if you want to keep checking to see if you're holding down a button, instead of saying just pressed, all you have to do is say is action pressed. That's a different thing, but that'll return true every time you press it. So now if I press it and hold it, whee, I moved away, right? And so now in order to make the rest of this controller, it's actually pretty easy. We're just going to take this, copy it, and paste it. I got to unindent it. Paste one more time. Paste. Unindent. And then instead of UI left, I just want to do UI right. Yep, exactly, +1. And then instead of UI left or right, I'm going to UI up. So what do we think we do here?
Y.
And then plus or minus?
It's a minus.
Yeah, minus is good. And then instead of up, we'll do down. And instead of x, we'll do y. And instead of minus, we'll do plus. And now, save that, hit play. And we've got a character moving around the screen. Hot dogs. It's pretty slow, right? It's not very fun to move at this speed. So this is where that idea of having an exportable variable comes in handy again, right? I'll do export var speed equals 5. And then instead of 1, I'll just do speed. 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 And speed. And then I'll run it again. And now you have a character who moves around pretty fast. Cool? So that's a whole lot. I think that's all the content I can probably try and fit in your brains for today. So I'm going to stop teaching you new things. And I want you to spend the rest of the time just trying to make this example.